For decades, the government hid ancient Inuit knowledge that could have helped us today. The traditional Inuit have a deeper connection to nature, survival, and the environment, giving them insights we've been missing for far too long. Let's have a look at what exactly made this wisdom too inconvenient to share. You know that feeling when you're starving at 3 p.m., even though you just had lunch 2 hours ago? Yeah, we've all been there. That's what happens when lunch consists of a sad sandwich and some chips. But here's where things get interesting. There's a group of people who never deal with that afternoon energy crash, and they've known the secret for thousands of years. The Inuit people have this fascinating relationship with meat that would make any modern nutritionist's head spin. While everyone else is fighting over the latest diet trend and arguing about keto versus paleo, they've been quietly thriving on a diet that's almost entirely meat-based. And we're not talking about your typical grocery store cuts. We're talking seal, whale, caribou, and fish so fresh it was swimming minutes ago. Here's a mind-blowing fact. Studies show that traditional Inuit diets contain up to 75% of calories from fat. That's right. While the world was being told to fear fat in the 80s and 90s, the Inuit were living their best lives with a diet that would make a cardiologist faint. But here's the kicker. They historically had remarkably low rates of heart disease. The whole thing works like a perfectly designed survival system. The high-fat content isn't just for taste. It's like having a built-in furnace that keeps you warm in temperatures that would freeze your smartphone solid. The protein? It's nature's building blocks, helping maintain muscle mass in conditions that would make a polar bear think twice. Raw meat isn't just about tradition either. It's actually brilliant science wrapped in cultural wisdom. Raw meat contains vitamin C, which would otherwise be destroyed by cooking. In an environment where you can't exactly grow oranges, this becomes a crucial survival strategy. They're literally fighting scurvy with sushi, except it's not exactly the California roll kind. But here's where it gets political. When you have a multi-billion-dollar industry built around processed foods and carb-heavy diets, the last thing you want is people discovering that humans can thrive on a completely different way of eating. And now, in the age of $8 coffees and $15 smoothie bowls, trying to follow a traditional Inuit diet would cost you more than a small car payment. A pound of wild-caught salmon could set you back $30, and that's if you can even find it. Meanwhile, you can get a burger from a fast food joint for less than $2. It's like the universe is playing a cruel joke on our wallets. The irony, as we face global food security challenges and environmental concerns, we're finally starting to look back at these traditional practices. Makes you wonder what else we might have missed while we were so busy advancing, doesn't it? Well, buckle up, because the Inuits' dietary wisdom is just the appetizer. While we were busy ignoring their food knowledge, we were also missing something literally lighting up the sky right above our heads. Those northern lights that fill up your Instagram feed, they're actually a sophisticated weather forecast, navigation system, and astronomical calendar all rolled into one natural phenomenon. Next time your GPS fails, blame the Aurora. These stunning light shows can actually mess with satellite signals, something our modern technology still struggles with. But while scientists were scratching their heads over aurora interference, the Inuit had already cracked the code centuries ago, just like they cracked the code of nutrition long before we invented protein shakes. Here's something that'll blow your mind. In 2023, NASA scientists confirmed that intense auroras can predict certain weather patterns up to 24 hours in advance. The Inuit, they've been doing this for generations. Talk about being ahead of the curve. Way, way ahead. The colors tell a story too. When the lights dance in green, the Inuit know stable weather is coming. Red auroras, time to prepare for strong winds. Modern science took until 2023 to start seriously studying these connections, probably because admitting that traditional knowledge could outperform million-dollar satellites wasn't exactly on their to-do list. But it gets better. During the winter months, when the sun barely shows its face, the Inuit used the northern lights as a natural flashlight. The aurora's reflection on snow creates enough light to navigate by. Nature's own headlights, if you will. No batteries required, never needs charging, and definitely won't leave you stranded when you forget to plug it in overnight. In the Arctic, where a wrong turn can mean the difference between life and death, The Inuit developed a relationship with the Aurora that goes way beyond oohs and ahs. They could read these lights like we read traffic signals, except their version never malfunctions and doesn't need electricity. This isn't just about pretty lights in the sky. It's about understanding our environment in ways that modern technology is only beginning to grasp. Maybe if we paid attention sooner, we wouldn't be scrambling now to combine traditional knowledge with modern science. But hey, better late than never, right? Just don't tell that to all the tourists who got lost while their GPS was having an Aurora-induced meltdown. Well, lucky for the Inuit, they've mastered another incredible innovation, one that modern architects are still scratching their heads over. The humble igloo might look simple, but it's actually a marvel of engineering that puts some of our modern buildings to shame. Most people think igloos are just blocks of snow stacked in a dome. That's like saying the pyramids are just fancy piles of rocks. In reality, an igloo is more like a natural thermos, and a pretty impressive one at that. Tests have shown that even when it's minus 50 degrees Celsius outside, that's minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit for you Americans, the temperature inside an igloo can stay at a cozy minus 7 degrees Celsius, 19 degrees Fahrenheit, just from body heat alone. Try getting that kind of insulation from your overpriced winter coat. The spiral construction isn't just for looks either. Each snow block is cut at a slight angle and placed in an upward spiral, creating a self-supporting dome that gets stronger as it settles. It's basically nature's Lego set, except these blocks actually stay together without that annoying plastic clicking sound. Here's a fun fact that'll make your heating bill cry. The snow used in igloos contains tiny air pockets that make it an incredible insulator. Modern insulation materials try to copy this same principle, but they cost thousands of dollars and probably won't last nearly as long as the skills passed down through generations of Inuit builders. The entrance tunnel? That's not just for dramatic effect. It's deliberately built lower than the living area, creating a cold sink that traps the heavier cold air while allowing the warmer air to rise and stay in the living space. That's some serious thermodynamics knowledge right there, and they figured it out without a single physics textbook. But did governments and construction companies rush to study this incredible architectural achievement? Nope. Instead, they spent millions developing synthetic insulation materials and complex heating systems. Meanwhile, the Inuit were staying warm in their free, biodegradable, locally sourced homes that could be built in a couple of hours. The best part? When spring comes and the igloo melts, it leaves no trace. Zero carbon footprint, zero waste, zero mortgage payments. Now that's what you call sustainable housing. Maybe instead of trying to figure out how to build colonies on Mars, we should have been paying more attention to how the Inuit managed to make comfortable homes in one of Earth's most extreme environments. That's where things get really interesting. Your phone's GPS might give up in a snowstorm, but the Inuit have navigation down to an art form that makes modern technology look like a toy compass from a cereal box. In 2022, a $2 million Arctic research expedition got completely lost when their GPS systems failed in a blizzard. Meanwhile, Inuit hunters regularly navigate through the same conditions using nothing but the wind on their faces and the sound of snow under their feet. It's like having a built-in navigation system that never needs a satellite signal or battery charge. The secret? They've learned to read the wind like a book. Every slight change in direction, every subtle shift in temperature tells them exactly where they are. When the wind hits the right side of your face at the start of your journey, it better be hitting the same spot on your way back, unless you fancy an unplanned camping trip in minus 40-degree weather. But here's the real kicker. In whiteout conditions, where you literally can't see your hand in front of your face, the Inuit listen to the sound of the wind. Different landscapes create different wind sounds. A cliff makes the wind whistle differently than a flat plain. They're basically using nature's surround sound system as a GPS. Remember those old military guys bragging about their advanced navigation systems? Turns out their fancy equipment stops working in extreme Arctic conditions. That's right. Billions of dollars in military tech can be outperformed by someone paying attention to how the wind feels on their cheeks. No wonder they kept this quiet for so long. The wind isn't just a natural GPS. It's also nature's weather forecast. Modern meteorologists spend millions on supercomputers to predict tomorrow's weather, and they still get it wrong half the time. A recent study showed weather apps are only accurate about 60% of the time, which is basically a fancy way of saying they're slightly better than flipping a coin. The Inuit, though, they've got weather forecasting down to such an exact science that you'd think they had a direct line to Mother Nature's personal assistant. Take the clouds. When most of us see just another gray sky, they're reading an entire weather story. Low, thick clouds mean snow is coming. High, dense ones, better grab your umbrella. The sky's color is another dead giveaway. That gorgeous red sunset you're posting on social media? To the Inuit, it's basically a giant rain-coming billboard. Purple-gray clouds aren't just moody Instagram filters, they're nature's way of saying, hey, maybe don't plan that picnic tomorrow. But the real meteorological magic happens when they combine all these signs. Wind from the north plus certain cloud patterns plus specific bird behaviors equals a forecast so accurate it makes your local weather person look like they're just guessing, which, let's be honest, they kind of are. A 2023 study found that in remote Arctic regions, traditional Inuit weather prediction was accurate 86% of the time, compared to satellite forecasts that only managed 52% accuracy in the same areas. That's not just beating modern technology, it's leaving it in the dust. The same study estimated it would take about $50 million in new weather monitoring equipment to match the accuracy of knowledge that's been passed down for free through generations. Here's where it gets really wild. Inuit weather prediction doesn't just tell you if it's going to rain or snow, it can warn you about incoming storms days before any satellite spots them. They notice subtle changes in animal behavior, slight shifts in wind patterns, and tiny variations in snow crystal formation that our most advanced instruments can't even detect. And yet, for decades, climate scientists and weather experts dismissed this knowledge as primitive folklore. They were too busy building expensive weather stations that break down in extreme cold to notice that the Inuit could predict a blizzard 3 days in advance just by watching which direction the lemmings were running. It's like having a supercomputer powered by squirrels and snowflakes, and it works better than anything we've built. What's even more ironic? These days, with climate change throwing traditional weather patterns into chaos, some of those same scientists are finally starting to pay attention. Modern climate models are actually being updated to incorporate traditional Inuit knowledge. Turns out those primitive observations might help us understand how our planet's weather is changing. Just took us a few centuries and millions of dollars in failed predictions to figure that out. They were also missing out on an entire pharmacy growing right under the Arctic snow. Big pharmaceutical companies spend around $2.6 billion developing a single new drug. But the Inuit were discovering natural remedies that actually work. And they didn't need a single laboratory coat to do it. Take willow bark, for example. Before fancy pills came along, the Inuit were using it to treat headaches and reduce fever. Sound familiar? That's because willow bark contains salicylic acid, the same stuff that makes aspirin work. Except this version doesn't come with a mile-long list of side effects and doesn't cost $8 a bottle. But that's just the beginning of nature's medicine cabinet. Crowberries might look like tiny purple marbles, but they pack more vitamin C than an orange. The Inuit used them to prevent scurvy long before British sailors figured out they needed citrus fruits to survive long voyages. Who needs expensive vitamin supplements when you've got free berries growing in your backyard? Here's something that would make modern dermatologists raise their perfectly groomed eyebrows: fireweed. This bright pink flower isn't just pretty, it's basically nature's neosporin. The Inuit used it to treat everything from minor cuts to serious burns. A 2023 study found that fireweed contains compounds that fight bacteria better than some modern antibiotics. Not bad for a primitive remedy, huh? Even moss got in on the medical action. Reindeer moss might sound like something Santa's helpers made up, but it's actually a powerful antibiotic. The Inuit used it to dress wounds and prevent infection. Meanwhile, Arctic moss became their go-to remedy for upset stomachs. It's like having a pharmacy growing right on the rocks. But did pharmaceutical companies rush to study these natural medicines? Of course not. They were too busy synthesizing artificial versions of natural compounds they could patent and sell for astronomical prices. A month's supply of some prescription anti-inflammatory drugs costs more than $300. The Inuits' natural alternatives, completely free if you know where to look. The real kicker came in 2023 when researchers finally decided to study these traditional remedies. They found that Labrador tea, which the Inuit used for respiratory problems, contains compounds that fight inflammation better than some prescription medications. Some of these plants even showed promise in treating conditions that modern medicine still struggles with. But hey, why invest in studying natural remedies when you can make more money selling synthetic drugs? Wildlife researchers spend millions of dollars on fancy tracking devices and satellite tags, but they're still playing catch-up with knowledge the Inuit have had for centuries. These days, a single high-tech wildlife tracking collar costs about $4,000. Multiply that by thousands of animals, and you've got yourself a pretty expensive way of doing something the Inuit did for free. In 2023, a major wildlife study in the Arctic lost track of an entire herd of tagged caribou when their tracking devices failed in the extreme cold. Meanwhile, local Inuit hunters knew exactly where the herd was headed. How? They noticed subtle changes in moss patterns, watched the behavior of smaller animals, and read the wind. Skills that don't need batteries or satellite uplinks. The Inuits' understanding of animal migration goes way deeper than just following tracks in the snow. They've mapped out entire networks of animal movement that would make Google Maps jealous. Take seals, for instance. Modern researchers were shocked to discover in 2024 that seals follow specific underwater highways during their migrations. The Inuit? They've known about these marine roadways for generations. They even have names for different seal routes based on the time of year and ice conditions. Birds are another story altogether. Modern ornithologists pride themselves on tracking bird migration with radar and tiny GPS backpacks. But decades before this technology existed, the Inuit could predict not just when Arctic birds would migrate, but exactly which route they'd take based on that year's weather patterns. A 2023 study found that their predictions were accurate 94% of the time, better than most modern tracking systems. Here's where it gets really interesting. When caribou herds change their migration routes due to climate change, scientists rush to update their computer models. The Inuit, meanwhile, already knew these changes were coming because they noticed small shifts in vegetation patterns and snow distribution years before. It's like they're reading a book while modern science is still trying to sound out the alphabet. The most mind-blowing part? Some animal behaviors that puzzled scientists for years, like why certain caribou herds suddenly changed direction or why seals sometimes skip their usual breeding grounds, made perfect sense to Inuit hunters. They understood these weren't random changes, but responses to subtle environmental signals that our fancy instruments couldn't detect. But instead of tapping into this knowledge, wildlife management agencies spent decades relying solely on Western scientific methods. They tagged animals with expensive devices, set up elaborate monitoring stations, and created complex computer models, all to track migrations that Inuit hunters could predict over a cup of tea. Talk about missing the caribou for the antlers. The Inuits' discoveries show how deeply they understand the Arctic and its challenges. Their knowledge, like predicting weather, tracking animal migrations, and managing resources, often outshines modern technology. For years, governments and industries ignored this wisdom, focusing on technology and profit instead. Now, as climate change and environmental issues grow, their insights are finally being valued. The Inuit teach us that traditional knowledge is powerful and essential for a sustainable future. It's time to respect and learn from their expertise to better care for our planet.